Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jeff Berwick, the dollar vigilante. He's speaking to us from that little tiny town in Mexico no one's ever heard of, Acapulco. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you very much. It's been a while.
I've had a lot of people inquire about this historical gold coin find off the coast of Israel, 2,000 plus coins that in your website you talked about how it's historical simply because it shows how long humans have been using gold as currency. Can you tell us about that discovery?
Definitely gold has been around for as long as we have human history, and in my opinion, human history, as you know, the winners always write the history, and as far as we can tell, we only have about 6,000 years of human history that's been recorded. I think there's obviously way more than that. I think there's actually billions and billions of years of history that we don't know anything about. But what we do know about human history so far is that gold has definitely always been a major part of human beings in the last 6,000 years. It's always been a major part of commerce and has always been considered something of value. No matter what the reason is, it always has been. And through the Federal Reserve System and the central banks, they've been trying really hard to get humans away from gold to the point where we actually see people like Mark Dice did a YouTube video where he walked around California and tried to get people to buy a 1 ounce gold coin for $25, and no one would buy it because they'd never seen it before and they don't know what it is. But I think we're going to see a massive change in the next few years as the fiat currencies collapse and as people start to realize what true money and true value is again, as opposed to paper currencies where they just print them up at will. Janet Yellen, that totally crazy Keynesian woman who has no experience in the markets. She prints up all the money she wants, and all they do is they paint pictures of dead criminals on them, and they call that money. So we've been living through a really crazy period of time monetarily, and I think it's going to be changing a lot. And it's not just gold. It's also going to be things like Bitcoin. New currencies are coming online that are private free market currencies. So it's going to be a very interesting period of time, and we're going to see a lot of changes in the monetary system over the next few years.
Is there more artificial currency like Bitcoin out there that's just computer generated?
Oh, yes, of course. There's literally thousands of cryptocurrencies. But really the only one that's really caught on so far is Bitcoin. And a lot of people don't realize how much it's really catching on. Almost every large company in the world, Microsoft and all kinds of companies, I think Dish Network, the satellite network, accepts Bitcoin. You can buy almost anything on Amazon with Bitcoin using various means called gift cards and things like that. And so there's been literally tens or hundreds of millions of dollars invested into Bitcoin-related technologies in the last few years by very major investors, including the New York Stock Exchange and people from the big banks. So they realize this is a major currency. There definitely is a lot of other cryptocurrencies out there, but none of them have yet come close to the acceptance or the size of Bitcoin, although they could, because a lot of them have improvements on Bitcoin. But the one thing about Bitcoin is it is open source software, and it can be changed at any time if people want to accept the new changes. So if new technology comes out that improves upon Bitcoin, it's quite likely that it will be included into the Bitcoin protocol. But just like anything, everything changes so fast nowadays that, yeah, it's totally possible that Bitcoin could disappear in the next few years and another currency could become the premier cryptocurrency. But at this moment in time, I see no evidence of that happening.
Yes, some governments have said Bitcoin's fine with us. Others have said we're banning it because it's used by drug traffickers. Is that a reason to ban a currency? Because drug traffickers happen to use it sometimes. Don't they use American cash too?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest currency used for drug trafficking or money laundering, neither of which is a crime because there is no victim, but if they want to say it's a crime in their artificial, crazy status system, the biggest currency used by far, nothing even comes close, is the U.S. dollar. You still see it down here in Mexico whenever they capture a free market entrepreneur who's trying to take plants from Colombia up to the U.S. where there's willing customers. They go into their house and they have literally rooms full of fiat currency U.S. Federal Reserve notes. stacked up. So that's just a thing that they say to try to get people to stop using things like cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. They're trying to put people into fear about it, to think it's bad, to think it's criminal to use it. It's absolutely not. It's actually criminal to use Federal Reserve notes under the U.S. Constitution. Under the U.S. Constitution, you're only supposed to have money minted from gold and silver. Of course, they don't have that today. So the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve notes, which are U.S. dollars, which have a pyramid with an all-seeing eye printed on the back of it that no one seems to notice, is considered to be the legal and the moral currency, when it's actually the complete opposite. The Federal Reserve and the central banks destroy economies. And as I mentioned, things like money laundering, that's not a crime. Taxes are the crime. That's what they say. And then they say that because people are trying to avoid paying extortion fees, which are called taxes, that when they try to avoid that, they're money laundering. And I totally support money laundering. I wish more people would do it. And I also have no problems whatsoever with people selling or purchasing substances, including plants like marijuana, for whatever currency they want to accept it for. I think the real crime is government and the central banks.
Well, we have 4 U.S. states now that have made marijuana legal, and they're making twice as much, in some cases 3 times as much money as they thought they would from legal marijuana. Why is the U.S. federal government still so anti-pot?
I think the main reason, well, if you look back at the history of marijuana, they actually outlawed it around the 1930s and 1940s. Before that, on the $10 bill in the U.S. in the 1920s was a marijuana farmer. It was one of the biggest cash crops in the U.S. Of course, hemp has so many uses, cannabis. It's also very medicinal, as we're finding out now. Cannabis oil, which is extracted from the cannabis plant or the marijuana plant, it actually cures cancer, and they're trying to prohibit people from getting access to that information, but it's totally true. It's one of the most medicinal plants on the planet. It also, if you smoke it or eat it or take it in some form or another in its psychoactive state, you actually expand your mind. And once you start to, for example, if you have a puff of marijuana, you start to question, why do I have people who own me? Why am I letting them extort me for money? That's why they don't like it. That's why they like alcohol, because it just makes people, dumbs them down and makes them kind of stupid and fall all over the place. But they still show up at work, and they still pay their taxes, and they don't question anything. And that's the main reason why it's been outlawed for so long. For example, that year there in Vancouver, they had the Vancouver riots after the Canucks lost in Game 7 a few years ago. There was literally hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets, smashing windows, fighting, lighting fires, and most of them were drunk. Now, if those people were on marijuana or something else, you'd see a massive outcry about banning marijuana or banning whatever drug they were on. But they were all drunk. And so no one brought up, hey, we should ban alcohol. Not that I think they should. I don't think any government should even exist, much less ban anything. But no one outcried about that. They just said, oh, we just need to spend more money on this corrupt police force, which actually caused a lot of the damage, lit their own police cars on fire. It's all been proven via various alternative media networks, including Press for Truth, Dan Dix in Canada, who's exposed a lot of the false flag and the agent provocateur acts. And actually, CBC just announced that they just uncovered some documents the other day showing that the Canadian government uses as some of its tactics as doing false flag events. So going back to the point about alcohol, yes, alcohol is by far literally thousands of times worse than marijuana in terms of almost every aspect of what it is. There's been 0 deaths in human history from marijuana, from overdosing on marijuana. You can't really overdose on it as opposed to alcohol. You can't really get addicted to it. You can sort of have a habit where you just enjoy doing it all the time, but you can't physically get addicted to marijuana as opposed to alcohol. Alcoholism is a major problem in our society. You never get very violent on marijuana. You mostly just want to eat chips and play video games and think about life, as opposed to alcohol, where you start to drink and a lot of people start to get kind of angry and they start to fight or beat their wives. Everything in our society done by government is heinous, and this is just another example. Hopefully Mexico soon makes all drugs legal. We would have such a much better world. You just have to look back to alcohol prohibition in the 30s to see what kind of chaos happens when you take something that a lot of people enjoy and make it illegal. You have headless bodies in the streets of Chicago. You have gangs everywhere as it gets pushed underground. And so any prohibition by government of any substance always leads to this.
Well, studies in the U.S. found that the highest per capita consumption of alcohol was during Prohibition.
That's another thing, too. When you make things illegal, it actually makes people want to do it more. It's a funny sort of a human thing. We've seen many countries where they've legalized a number of substances, including Portugal, which essentially legalized all drugs, and actual drug use went down. I actually have a friend. I don't understand it myself because I'm not that kind of person who I want to do it more if it's illegal. But I have a friend, and he smokes marijuana quite a bit. Very nice guy, and he never hurts anybody. It's no problem, and it makes him think more and makes him more interesting and creative in some ways. And he told me that the reason he smokes so much is because it's illegal, and if they made it legal, he'd probably smoke less.
Washington State has found drunk driving is down since they legalized pot.
That's another thing. When you're smoking marijuana, you don't generally get in your car and drive at 100 miles an hour and swerve all over the road like you do on alcohol. In general, if you even do drive, you're probably going to be doing about 5 miles an hour. You're going to be a little paranoid, and you're just going to be going to the store to get a bag of chips. So everything about marijuana, and actually a lot of drugs, not just marijuana, but a lot of, especially marijuana, is so much better than alcohol in almost every way, that it's just been the war on drugs has been a heinous human crime, a crime against humanity for the last 40 years plus. And we just have to look back to when the war on drugs really started, and that was with the great Richard Nixon, who also took the gold standard away from the dollar. He posed with none other than Elvis Presley to launch the war on drugs, and we all know Elvis Presley overdosed on a wide variety of chemicals and drugs. This whole thing is insane. We need to stop it. Having cops out there busting into people's doors, ruining people's lives because they have some plants in their house is the complete height of insanity.
Well, we have the case of a judge in the U.S. being jailed for 28 years because he was taking bribes from the privatized prisons to put innocent black people in jail.
Yeah, that's another whole angle. A lot of people say about governments, what would happen if we didn't have government? There'd be private jails. Well, there's private jails under government, and it's actually way worse because it is with government, so it's a form of fascism. So in the U.S., there's many private prisons, and they work with the government to try to put as many people in the prisons as possible because then they make more money. It's complete insanity. We have to get rid of all these ideas. First of all, just get rid of the war on drugs. That would make the world literally a better place massively overnight.
How many police officers would lose their jobs if the war on drugs was stopped tomorrow?
It'd be about 90% in my estimation, and that's why actually the biggest lobbyers against stopping the drug war are the police and also lawyers. This whole system is heinous. It's crazy. It's absolute insanity. There's literally millions of people in jail in the U.S. for victimless crimes, and if it's a victimless crime, it's not a crime. The U.S. has by far nothing that comes close to the amount of people in cages in the world, and many of them, I hear as many as 80,000 right now, are in solitary confinement, literally in a concrete room for 23 hours a day, which is literally torture for victimless crimes. It ruins families. For example, if a man is driving home from work, he's had a hard day, maybe he's working 2 jobs to keep up with all the taxes he has to pay to the government and all the inflation from the central banks, and he wants to relax a bit, so he has a puff of marijuana. If he sees red and blue lights in his mirror, that could ruin his life. He could end up being kidnapped, tortured, put into a cage. Then his family has no means of income, destroys the family. When he gets out, he has a hard time getting a job because now he's a criminal or a felon. This is insanity. It's complete insanity. It has to stop, and it will stop.
We'll have more with Jeff Berwick right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking to Jeff Berwick, the Dollar Vigilante. Jeff, March 16th, besides just being St. Patrick's Day Eve, an important date for people who believe in freedom of speech, freedom of information. That was Freedom of Information Day. However, I noticed on your website, it was also a very ironic day considering it was Freedom of Information Day. Maybe explain.
Yeah, it was hilarious to me to find out that there actually is a Freedom of Information Day in the U.S., one of the least free countries on earth at this moment in time, a place where There's just absolutely no freedom of information when it comes to the government. You can see that with people like Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, who's hiding out in London for years because he exposed some of the information about the U.S. government. People like Edward Snowden, who defected to Russia because he exposed what the U.S. government is doing. When Barack Obama came into office, he talked about how he was going to make this the most transparent administration ever, and how he was going to support whistleblowers who show U.S. government fraud or theft or criminal actions. He's, of course, just like every single politician in history, done the exact opposite, and he has put all kinds of people in cages or had them run away from the U.S. for even trying to expose some of the things they're doing. And the Freedom of Information Day is actually U.S. government sort of a day. I think they have a day for everything, but they have one for that. And on that very day, the White House, and this is during the time when Hillary Clinton was going through her problems about hiding all her 30,000 emails and deleting them, that they said that the White House is now exempt from transparency, so you can't do a Freedom of Information Act request to the White House. They did that on the very day of Freedom of Information Day. It's completely hilarious. Totally sad. You just have to look at all the transparency of the Obama government with people like Nancy Pelosi saying about Obamacare that if you want to find out what's in the act, you'll have to just wait until it passes, which is sort of the opposite of what he was saying. When he was running for chief murderer of the U.S., president of the U.S., he said that he was going to put all the bills up on the internet first so everyone could see them before they get passed. And of course, the exact opposite has happened. He's passed the Patriot Act every single year. He said he was going to close Guantanamo Bay, which is one of the most heinous torture centers in the world. And he hasn't. He said he was going to take the U.S. out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and now they have some of the biggest troops ever moving into those regions, including now also in other regions, including Syria. They're involved in Yemen, a war that they just started a couple of days ago. They're trying to start a World War III in the Ukraine. I guess he's trying to live up to his Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when is he going to earn the damn thing? And here in Canada, we have Prime Minister Harper bringing in Bill C-51, an anti-terrorism act. First of all, allows police and security forces to violate the Constitution. And the only limits they have on questioning somebody is you can't kill them and you can't rape them.
Well, that's nice. The Canada has just gone just totally down the same path as the U.S. They're trying to pass all these things. I was very heartened, however, to see, unlike in the U.S., when they have the Patriot Act and all these things that no one really protested, that there was quite a massive amount of protests in Canada. So apparently still some people in Canada are still fairly awake and sort of realize what's going on. So I was heartened by that. I don't know if they're going to pass it. I haven't looked up to see the progress of it. But they're trying to put in this massive police state, massive state everywhere in the U.S., in Canada, all across Europe, in countries around the world. They're trying to lock it down and turn us all into 1984. I think thanks to the internet, however, that we have a chance that they won't be able to do a lot of these things. We're starting to see a lot of people waking up. So there's going to be a race here for the next few years, and I think the next decades or centuries of humanity are going to depend on what people do over these next few years. We're either going to go to complete tyranny or very close to freedom, and I think you know which side I'm hoping for.
Well, the BC Civil Liberties Association has filed yet another complaint with the federal government about CSIS, the Canadian Security Agency, illegally spying on people taking part in legitimate activities. And all the people who took part, for example, in the demonstrations against Bill C-51, they were all photographed. They've all had files opened up on them by CSIS as if they were terrorists. That's illegal under Canadian law to do that. And they said that you are criminalizing people taking part in legitimate activity. And this is before you've even passed this bill, which could make, just discussing the fact that there's terrorism in the world could be deemed making you a terrorist. What is terrorism? They don't have a good definition of it.
There is no bigger terrorist organization in the world than the U.S. government and the CIA. They're causing massive problems all over the place. The CIA is transporting massive amounts of drugs, which should all be decriminalized and privatized instead of them gaining billions of dollars. Of course, in Afghanistan, the Taliban had the opium production, the poppy production down quite a bit, almost to zero at one point, which I don't necessarily agree is a good thing. But as soon as the U.S. took over, Afghanistan has had the biggest opium crops in history. This whole system, the problem is the government. The government is the biggest terrorist organization on earth. We have to get rid of them, and of course the central banks that support them, which central banks are communist institutions. They centralize the economy, central planning of the economy. It's the exact opposite of freedom. It's the exact opposite of free markets. And we have to wake people up to get rid of these things. And you pointed out that they actually, the Canadian government, with what they're doing with C-51, that is actually illegal under the Constitution of Canada. So if there's one lawyer out there who has any sort of ability, any sort of heart, any sort of soul, he should be pushing forward to try to charge the Canadian government with criminal acts. And of course, he'll probably be killed, and that's why most people won't do it. But we need a lot of people to wake up and start fighting against this. If we don't fight to retain just the small amount of freedom we have left, we're going to lose everything.
Jeff, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been Jeff Berwick, the Dollar Vigilante. His website, dollarvigilante.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.